Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be the second video in this particular CSS series. So in the last video we kind of spent a long time kind of going over how to select elements using CSS. In this video I want to focus more on positioning elements in different ways. So in that case, let's go back to my screen and let's do this. So here's where we kind of left off. Let me go back to my index.html, and the first things first, let's position a block element with text in it. So div, that's a block element, and then inside that block element we're going to have a span tag with our title, hello world. Okay, cool. Now, right now, what do we see here? So if I go over to that div, see it's a block element, so it has the whole thing left and right, and that's fine. Now the span, again, it's an inline element, so see it just wraps the content. So inline block inline. Now what we want to do is first I want to make the actual container smaller. Okay, I always like to kind of make things have a smaller width. I just think it looks better. So I'm going to just get rid of all this stuff from the last video. And we are going to make the div that's inside the body. And we're going to say it has a width of 80%. Okay, and then we're going to give it a border so that way you can see, where that div is. Border is 2 pixels solid red. Cool. And see the border wraps around the box, not the content, but the box. And so the box is smaller, it's only 80% of the width, but see, it's not centered. So how would I center the box? Not centering the text, the box. Okay, so the way you do that is you're going to use the margin property. So the margin property, technically, you could basically, the way it works, the simplest way to think about it is, I always just think the first number as top bottom. So we'll say, hey, we want 10 pixels margin, and margin's always the outside. Okay, so there's padding and margin. I always think of padding like a padded cell. Where's the padding in a padded cell? Inside the cell. So it's the cushion on the inside, margin's the cushion on the outside of the box. So we're going to say, hey, there's a 10 pixels margin from the top and bottom. What matters is the right and left margin, which is the second number, and that you want to set to auto. That just auto centers it, and that works. And there you go. See, it's centered, and you see you got that little bit of cushion there at the top because it's the 10 pixels of margin top and bottom. Okay. Now this hello world is still not centered. So the div is centered, the block is centered, but now we need to center the inline content. So for that is what you would use text align. I could use text align here, which actually I'll just do that. And text align will take the content, any inline content within the block, and change its alignment. And in this case we want to center it. Save. So there, and now it's centered. Now I don't like that border being so close to hello world. I would like to give that little cushion. So in that case, now I'm going to want padding. I want some cushion inside the box. Okay, so let's do padding. And if you just use one number, it's applied to all 4 sides, top, right, left, bottom. So I'm going to give it 20 pixels of padding. And see that gives you a little bit more breathing room to look a little bit better. Okay, so that's positioning of inline and block content. Now, always the trickiest part that people have is trying to position stuff in like columns and rows and whatnot. So I'll show you a couple different ways to do that. Let's go back to our HTML. Now, first we're going to go over what's called flexbox. But whether it's flexbox or it's grid, which we'll go over afterwards, you always need a container. Okay, you just need one block that acts as a container of all your other blocks. Okay, so think of it like a block of blocks. Okay, so I'm gonna use a main tag as my container, and then I'm gonna have a bunch of divs inside of it, and they're all gonna say hello world. Save. Cool. So before I do any styling, and let me get rid of the styles we have so far. All right, well, it doesn't really matter. But what do we see here? Okay, when I do it this way, I see that there are 4 blocks within a larger block. So main is the block which the 4 blocks are in, and then inside there's 4 divs, but they're stacked on top of each other. So that's the natural behavior of block elements. They get stacked on top of each other. But I don't want that. I want them in columns. I want them to be like one row of squares. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that main tag, the container. I'm going to say this from now on. This container doesn't behave the normal way a container does. I want it to behave with what's called flex. So I'm going to change its display property, which by default is block. I could even make it inline if I wanted to make it inline content. So I could actually change a div to an inline tag, and I can change a span to a block tag if I wanted to. There's no reason to do that, but you could. And I want to change it to flex. Okay. And now let's see what happens when I do that. Okay, so now what it does, it creates a row of all these elements. So it stacks them in a row instead of on top of each other. So that's nice. That's cool. So right now it just evenly spaces them out because none of those divs have a set height. But let's say I made those divs have a set width. Okay, body div. Actually, they technically do. They have the 80%, but it's flexible. So let's say we gave these a fixed width of 500 pixels. Okay, and width. So now those divs are going to have a fixed width of 500 pixels. Okay, refresh. Not enough. Let's make them even wider. So let's say 1,000 pixels. Save. Okay, it's just squeezing them in there by default. The reason being is that a flexbox will naturally just force things to fit within the row, even if it's wider than the row. So if I really want them to be 1,000 pixels, what I can do is I can then add a wrap property to the wrapper, to the container. So I do flex, it's called flex wrap. And flex wrap, we're going to change that to wrap, which will, and then wrap reverse, we just wrap it in the opposite direction. Okay, and see now it wraps them in the columns. Okay, because each row is too big. But let's say let's make this, because there are 1,000 pixels each one wide, but let's go back to 500. And see now it does it like that. So again, it's just basically going till the width is done, and then going on to the next row. Now, right now, you see they're kind of like evenly spaced. That's nice and all. But what if I want to change the way that those are spaced with each other? I can do what's called justify content. Okay, and you can do center. Let's do that first. Which is the default, or just the way it kind of looks right now. Actually, let me make this. Let's change the width. Let's make these 100. This will make this piece a little bit clearer. Okay, so justify content, center. Yeah, that's centered. Okay. And then there's space around, which means there's going to be an equal amount of space around each block. Okay, which in this case is pretty much the same. It won't always be the same. Space between, we'll take the 2 furthest blocks on the ends, attach them to the edge, and then worry about the space in between. Although, it's not really changing regardless. I have a feeling it's because of Where's that text align? Root. Let's go over here to main. Yeah, don't see much of a difference that. Where do I have the, what's the div? If I change the text line to center. No. Okay. Oh, there's the div. Okay, and you can kind of see how that all collapses. Okie dokie. Well, there's 3 different ones. There's a good way to kind of get a feel for like justified content and align items is a game called Flexbox Froggy. That there's a bunch of Flexbox games where you can get used to sort of how they use Flexbox. But it basically allows you to align stuff in the content. There's different properties you can have. Generally, if anything you want in a row, I use Flexbox. And oftentimes when I build a website, I do it row by row. So I break down my website to different rows and then build out each row with its own container for that row. It just ends up being more logical for me. Now let's do that as a grid. So if I were to change this to a grid, okay, what you do is that first you have to change the container to grid, and then what you're going to do is you're going to change grid, I think it's grid template areas, grid template areas. And the way this works is that you create a grid. You literally sketch it out with like the names. So we're going to say 1, 2. So we're going to create like a 2 by 2 grid. 3, 4. Okay. I don't know why that's complaining. Specifies named grid areas which are not associated with any particular grid item but can be referenced. Okay, yeah. Not sure why the red coloring at the moment. Okay. But that's technically how that would work. So I'm saying, hey, I have a grid. It's a 2 by 2 grid. See, so it's 2 columns, 2 rows. So you think of this grid, and then I can name what property is going to be in each one. Okay, so I'm going to say, and now what I can do, so for this, I need to really kind of give each of these an ID. You'll see why. Okay, so ID 1, ID equals 2, ID equals 3, ID equals 4. Save. Okay, so now that we have our grid areas, we actually have to specify which elements are in those grid areas. So we're going to say ID 1. Okay, and then just so you can see the colors, so we're going to say background color is olive. And then grid area is 1. Okay, so basically this, whatever element has the 1 ID is going to go wherever this 1 is in the grid. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing for 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. So 2, 2, red. So as long as these grid areas match the grid area in the grid template area. Because basically what you're doing here is you're kind of sketching out your design for where the different elements should be on a grid. And then here you're saying which elements fill those spots. So 3, 3, blue, and then 4, blue, and then we'll say orange. and this is 4. Okay, so let's save that. Let's see how we're looking. Okay, we see the orange one. Something's a little off with how we did this. Okay, so let's see here. Main. There's div ID 2. They are all on top of each other for the moment. Div 3, 4. So let's think about this. Okay, 1, 2. And which one's the orange one? Orange is, and that's the one that showed up? Yeah, so orange is 4. Something is not right. I div with an ID of 3. They're all in the main tag. The main is the grid container. This has an ID of 1. This has an ID of 2. This has an ID of 3. And this has an ID of 4. Okay. Let me take a look. But here we go. So it says grid area 1. And nothing else. So the string didn't quite take. So let's take a look at this. I think this needs to be double quotes. So it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh wait, I think I know why. I think it's supposed to be like this, a separate string for each one. So 3, 4. So row 1 is 1 and 2. Row 2 is 3 and 4. There we go. There we go. Okay, so see 1, 2, 3, 4. And 4's the orange one. Perfect. And the cool thing is, they're just put whatever so basically, the only reason 1's showing up where it is because I said it fills in the grid area 1. Now I could do this. I could change and say, hey, I just want that area to be the whole row. So now it's going to take this element and stretch it across the whole row. Okay. It kind of tossed that over there. Again, you have to tinker around with it. Okay. Let's see here, main. So that created a sort of an odd grid, not my intention. Okay, 1, 1, 3, 4. Okay. Let's change that back to 2. Then I can have them switch places, so I can make this 2, 1. So the one that's 2 will now be in the place of 1 and whatnot. And see, now they see these two swapped. Now let's say I want to swap this red one with this orange one. Okay, that's 2, so the 2 should go here. And 4 should go here. So once you have to set it up, it makes it really easy to change, which makes responsiveness, mobile responsiveness, really easy because you can just redraw the grid in your mobile query to like a column or something. Okay, and see now those swapped. So grid's really cool, okay? And there's a lot more you can do with grid, but that's just the basic idea of like positioning with grid. Always recommend reading more if you want to learn more about grid. I'm trying to think if there's any other really important pieces about positioning. Again, you can have grids inside flex boxes. You can have flex boxes inside grids. You can have flex boxes inside flex boxes. There's no real limit. It's just a matter of just kind of getting used to setting these things up. The other kind of useful thing to know about is fixed positioning. So let's get rid of all this. Okay, we're just going to have that div with hello world in it. Save, and let's say the main element actually has a fixed width and height. So we're going to get rid of all this, and we're just going to say this has a width of 500 pixels. Okay, this has a height of 500 pixels. Border 5 pix green, solid green. We'll give it some margin. Let's say 10 pix. Oh, and then 10 pix auto, because again we want to center it. So now we should have a green box in the middle. There we go, and there's the hello world thing. And the idea is I want to position this somewhere in this box that I choose. Okay, so that green one, it's olive. I'll get rid of the grid area thing. And now I want to position this. What I can do is I take a property called position, and I can change it to fixed. Now fixed means it's fixed on the page, so I'm positioning it relative to here. So I'm saying how many pixels it is from this corner of the screen. Now I'd rather position it relative to this corner of the screen, relative to its container. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to relative position, relative. So it's relative to the container that it's in. And now I can use positions, things like top, left, right. So I'm going to say I want it to be 100 pixels from the top of this container, and left 100 pixels from the container. Okay, and this needs a colon. Let's see that top, left, something else positioning it as well. But yeah, so I can now play around with where it is, and this is kind of how you create, a hero image. Sometimes I would just take this container, I can add a background image to the container, and then maybe position text over it. Okay, so that's, again, relative is relative to the container, and then fix is relative to the screen. And then if I have multiple things that I'm positioning, so there's multiple things in there, and I want to make sure like this one's on top of this one or behind this one, then I would just change z index. Z index kind of is like layers. So the higher the number, the higher they are on the stack. So think of like a stack of paper. 0 would be at the very bottom, 1,000 would be at the very top, and you can kind of choose where they are. So that way, if things overlap that you've positioned, fixed or relative, that the one you want showing on top shows on top. And yeah, that's a pretty good overview of CSS. There's a lot more. There's a lot more. And I guess one more quick thing is just to show you a couple things that I have here. My boilerplate is that there's this root pseudo selector, which really doesn't select anything. It's just a place to store variables. Variables often always have 2 dashes and a name, and then you put whatever value you want to store in that variable. And if you want to use that variable, you can use it anywhere. So like in this case, font family, you just use this vars function, and inside the function you pass in the variable you're using. So that's also a nice trick that's pretty useful. Being able to use variables really kind of limits having to repeat stuff in your CSS if you need to make changes later on, because then you just change the variable, which changes everywhere the variable is used. So with that, I think we're good. I'll see you guys later on. Ciao.